Millionaire slams the brakes after seeing a 7-year-old girl with 3 babies on the street. Would you take one? Morning peeled itself from the mountains as if the city were a husk being opened, soft mist lifting from the slopes above Medellin and slipping down to the valley where the streets already throbbed with buses and vendors and the squeal of brakes. In the center, where towers of glass tried to outshine their own reflections, a skeleton of a building remained, ribs of rebar and spine of concrete rising over a lot choked by weeds and tossed bottles. Birds nested in the hollow beams. Graffiti vines curled over cracked pillars. The place held its breath the way an empty church does, quiet but not peaceful, cramped with the residue of prayers. Within the building's 3rd floor, inside a room without a door, a little girl knelt by 3 bundles tucked into a tattered leather jacket. The jacket had once belonged to a man whose name Izzy Harper never knew. She had washed it in a bucket weeks ago until the water turned gray and had hung it near a hole where the sun slid in like a blade. She stroked the stitching now with 2 fingers as if the jacket could answer back. Under it, 3 newborns slept in the strange and determined way of the very young, chests flicking like quick shadows. Mason wheezed faintly, Noah's fists hovered near his cheeks, and Sam made a pursed-lip face every few breaths, a dream he could not swallow. Izzy breathed on her knuckles to warm them and counted the formula left in a soft tin. The powder clung to the sides like stubborn snow. She tapped it twice and could tell there were only 2, maybe 3 feedings if she stretched it with boiled water and the patience that made her jaw ache. She had learned to press all the air out of the bottle nipple with her thumb, to tilt just so when Mason's swallow hitched, to rub their backs in circles small as coins when they forgot how to breathe like the world was new every minute and needed teaching. In her pocket, a worn piece of notebook paper folded into quarters pressed against her thigh. She didn't need to unfold it. The words were inside her the way teeth are set in bone. Promise me, you keep them together. Promise me you will be together, no matter what. Caroline Harper had whispered the last part with a crackle in her lungs that made every word a splinter. Izzy had been 6 then, a startling morning just like this one but colder, the city a hard sound outside, and Caroline's eyes were the blue of a cornflower she had once pointed out from a bus window. A nurse had stood at the doorway, knuckles white around a clipboard, and moved her mouth silently like a fish. Izzy remembered her mother's smell of eucalyptus chest rub and fabric softener and a tired sweetness, how the smell had thinned over months until all that remained was eucalyptus and effort. She rose now and brushed dust from her knees. The baby's bottles had been rinsed and wrapped in a clean rag. 3 diapers lay like white ships on the floor, folded precisely as Mrs. Ruiz from the market had taught her when she was not too busy to look away from the scale. Poor Delante, poor Deetras, Mrs. Ruiz had said, flipping the cloth with a flourish, then whispering that babies leak like secrets if you're careless. Izzy had laughed then, out of effort mostly. She rarely laughed for free. The diapers were precious as winter fruit. She had 1 pack left, bought cheap because the corner was crushed, and she kept them beneath the jacket as if the jacket could guard more than skin. A sound drifted up the stairwell, a vendor calling guarapo, fresh sugarcane juice, and the rhythm of 2 voices falling into an argument the way rain falls into gutters. Izzy listened the way a cat listens, the city mapping itself on her pulse. Then she made the decision she tried to make every day before the twins. No, the triplets. People forgot it mattered, that she would still be brave after her brave ran out. I won't be long, she whispered to the bundles. One of the babies twitched, a ripple down a pond. I will be fast and quiet and back before the sun reaches the big crack. The big crack was a fissure in the wall that acted like a sundial, a sunblade that moved along the concrete and told Izzy it was time for the next bottle, the next diaper, time for her to turn her fear into a tighter knot and tuck it where her ribs met. She lifted the jacket, rearranged the babies so they faced one another, 3 small moons in a tight orbit, and tucked the rag between them to share warmth. She placed a chipped cup with boiled water on the floor, a promise to herself that she would come back to make it milk. Her shoes were too big, donated, abandoned, both, but their looseness made her seem smaller, made people decide she did not exist. That invisibility was a kind of cloak she did not trust anymore. Last week, 2 boys had followed her to the building and laughed until she set the jacket down and looked at them with a fury that made them shrug themselves out of the room, shoulders wider than their courage. She moved quickly, past a piece of scaffolding that trembled if you breathed too near it, past the sleeping bundle of an old man who had told her his name, but whose name had evaporated in her head like an early mist. On the stairwell landing she paused, listening. The market would be open. The hospital would be crowded. The buses would drag invisible nets of fumes behind them. She hated the smell because it made her think of Caroline's lungs, but it also covered hers, salty with fear. Street level smelled like overripe mangoes and gasoline, and the kind of fried food that made your stomach argue with itself. Izzy's stomach had learned politeness. She never heard it complain anymore. She joined the flow of people the way a tiny fish slips between the bigger ones and threaded toward the corner where the shop with formula kept it behind the counter near the cigarettes. The floor was always sticky there, and the man behind the counter always looked at her as if she might eat the labels off the cans, but sometimes he softened if no one was watching. The world pressed on her. She could feel it, the heaviness of sky and gaze and sirens far away. But she kept her chin up because Caroline used to tip her chin with a finger and say, "Storms see the top of you first." She passed a bus stop where a woman argued into a phone about a boyfriend who had failed to carry a single bag of cement the day before and how a man who doesn't lifts nothing. Across the street, a glass door slid open and a man in a navy suit stepped out with a face made of reflection and time. Leon Moore scanned the street with the habit of someone who measured things without knowing he measured them. The width of a sidewalk, the speed of a car, the way a line of people bent toward a kiosk as if pulled by something magnetic. He lifted his wrist then and frowned, and the driver, who had been waiting with the car's engine whirring like a caged cat, eased forward. Leon liked mornings because numbers behaved in mornings. He could line them up and push them across a desk, and they would click into place. He liked receipts and proposals and the sketch of a tower that would rise on that corner, and this one, liked how money, when you didn't look too hard, did as it was told. He had a dozen messages waiting about a project hovering at $50 million, the kind of round number that attracted attention and teeth. The hang-up was always human, he thought. There were families in crumbling buildings that had to be moved, forms to be signed, a councilwoman whose eyebrows lifted in public meetings like twin crows. He told himself he was patient. He told himself the city needed what he built more than it needed what it had. He told himself he was building shelters from weather. Less often did he admit he was building mirrors. The car nosed into traffic. He rubbed his eyes with his thumb and forefinger and tried not to think about how sleep had become a visitor he could not quite schedule. Numbers behaved in mornings, insomnia did not. He pulled a folder from the seat beside him and slid a document free. The document contained a list of families to be resettled, columns of names and notes, and the hard little word pending repeated until it lost meaning. Somewhere in his mind, he kept a clean ledger of what he told himself charity was, and these families were a line item. He knew nothing of them. He was good at not knowing. Izzy took a breath and stepped into the shop. The man behind the counter looked at her with suspicion preloaded on his tongue. ¿Qué quieres, chica? Leche de formula, por favor. La de siempre, she said, careful with politeness, careful the way you are with matchsticks. Dinero primero. His eyes flicked to the corner where a mirror showed the aisle, where sometimes girls the size of Izzy slid things into pockets the size of fear. She slid 3 coins forward and felt her pocket flatten. Not enough. She lifted the tin she had brought with her, a tin with a smart blue baby on it, and shook it gently. Can I exchange? I bring back empty. For small one. He stared. No, that's not how. Please. The man blinked slow, enjoyed the power of it, then sighed and set a smaller tin on the counter. He pushed it forward an inch, then stopped. If you bring back not empty next time, no more. And teens. Yes, I understand. Her voice was clear as glass. She took the tin as if it might shatter. Outside, the air felt new again. She hugged the tin to her chest and threaded back through bodies, the taste of relief dry as paper on her tongue. She kept her eyes down, remembering that a policeman had once bent to her and asked where her mother was, and she had said, working, because that was the only kind of answer adults preferred. The policeman had smiled like a person who had heard a rehearsed song and had clapped her shoulder in a way that made her bones flinch. She turned onto the block where the building rose and immediately stopped. A man stood in her hallway of wind. Not a man, a boy with greasy hair, empty hunger in his eyes, a cigarette clinging to his lower lip. He was kicking an empty can, and the can skittered toward her like a fast bug. She stepped aside. He eyed the tin. "Got any for me, Nina?" he said, voice lazy, eyes busy. No, she tried to step past him. He shifted his foot, not blocking her as much as measuring her. "You always carrying something," he said. "Maybe one day you carry for me." "I carry my brothers," she said, and the knife of pride in her voice startled them both. She bolted then, foolishly fast, and slipped into the stairwell. She climbed 2 flights and paused to listen, counted 3 breaths to match 3 babies, then ran the last flight, the tin rattling like a hidden drum. She slipped into the room where the jacket lay and saw the sunblade had advanced along the wall to the chipped paint that looked like a map of a place she had never been. The babies squirmed as if her return loosened their dreams. She laughed then, relief quick and fragile, and she could smell the faint sweetness of their heads and their newness, which was always a bit like bread. She boiled water on a camping stove a man had traded for the last of Caroline's pots and poured it carefully, measuring with her eyes and then with her wrist. Mason sipped, gulped, paused, and Izzy tipped the bottle away to let him breathe. Noah fussed, and she began the song Caroline used to hum when the electricity cut out. Little bird, sing your light," she murmured, words that did not have to make sense to tell the truth. Sam, the smallest, watched her with a newborn's solemnity, as if she were a horizon he intended to remember. In a gleaming conference room 3 blocks away, Leon tracked a red line on a chart with his index finger while a man across the table, a partner named Raphael who liked his suits a size too tight, explained interest rates as if Leon hadn't learned them 20 years ago in a windowless office smelling of ink. A photograph of a proposed residential tower glowed on the wall, 24 floors of glass and modest luxury, and the line of families to move had become a footnote in the slide deck. Leon felt his attention lurch. Mornings were for numbers. He had told himself that. But something in him, a muscle unused, stretched. He put the folder over the photograph and pinched the bridge of his nose. Raphael stopped mid-sentence. "You all right, Chief?" Leon said. "Continue." But his mind had snagged on a memory not his own. A rumor last week of a child seen slipping into the old building on Calle 40 for carrying more than a bag could hold. He had dismissed it then as courtyard chatter, the way old problems raise their heads when new money arrives. Still, there are certain rumors you do not want to be true anywhere within the property lines of your day. He straightened. "Let's adjourn," he said, and the table sighed with relief. "I want to drive." The driver positioned the car like a chess piece, and Leon slid in with the kind of impatience that moves even if you tell it not to. "Calle 40 y Cuatro," he said, and the driver lifted his eyebrows without moving his gaze from the lane. "Si, senor." The car merged. The city swung open, a fan of color and heat. Leon watched the sidewalk the way he watched budget lines for signs of failure, of risk. He had trained himself to ignore faces, not out of cruelty, but out of efficiency. Faces were slow, but then the flow of people parted as if pushed by an invisible hand. Izzy had decided to take the babies into light while the room aired, a quick minute only, a tiny relocation from shadow to sun. She wrapped the jacket around all 3 and lifted one bundle at a time into her arms, balancing them with the practiced precision of a worker balancing 3 plates. She moved to the stairwell, paused to listen for the boy with the cigarette, then edged down. The day hit her eyes like a shout. The jacket was heavy now, the bundles too. She tightened her grip. "Careful, Izzy," she told herself, and the sound of her name in her mouth gave her courage. She stepped onto the sidewalk, the street enormous and indifferent before her, the mountain rising stone by stone behind. A bus snorted. Someone laughed. The world did not lower itself to her height. Across the lane, Leon saw her, saw the nearly impossible geometry of her small frame and the 3 swaddled shapes and the set of her jaw, saw the way pedestrians glanced and looked away because looking too long at certain truths rearranges what you think your day is about. Something old and animal inside him, as old as when his father once grabbed his shoulder at a job site and yanked him back from a swinging beam, snapped to attention. He did not feel noble or charitable, did not even feel curious. He felt a hot, precise focus, as if the city had suddenly written a number in a wide margin, and the number was his to solve. "Stop," he said. It came out too softly because he was still a man in a car, and the windows were closed. The driver didn't hear. "Stop," he said again, louder, and the driver flicked his eyes to the mirror. The car slid an inch, and then another, momentum a habit. The girl shifted the bundles, her knee buckled, her shoe slipped on a slick of mango, and one of the babies let out a thin-threaded cry that thinned Leon's blood. "Stop the car," Leon said, and this time his voice was the voice he used when a crane's load swung low over two men without helmets, and he said the one word that set the world to a better angle. The driver hit the brakes, and tires squeaked. Horns answered in chorus. Leon's hand was already on the door. Izzy adjusted the jacket. Her arms were burning. She had measured this walk 10 times in her mind and not accounted for the way fear makes the air heavier. She prepared to cross like a soldier, counting to 3. 1, 2. A black car door swung open so fast it clipped the edge of the lane and caught a slice of sunlight that made her blink. A man in a navy suit stepped out with a speed unbefitting his clothes and scanned her from forehead to ankles, as if counting what might break. He said something she did not hear over the engine and the noise and the way blood roared in her ears. He raised a hand, palm out, not to stop her, but to stop everything else. The driver leaned across the seat and said something about traffic, about schedules. The man ignored him, took a step toward Izzy, and then another. He looked like someone who knew where he was going and had, for the first time in a long time, changed his mind. He smelled faintly of soap and the cold of air conditioning, and something sharper, like paper cut. The city bellowed around them, but that sound seemed to slide off his shoulders. He crouched, an elegant man in 2 new shoes crouching in street grime, and said in Spanish softer than his suit, "Déjame ayudarte." Izzy clutched tighter. "No," she said, not fierce but firm. "I can do it." "I know," he said, with a certainty that startled them both. "But today is heavy." Her eyes lifted to his. They were brown like the inside of a walnut. He held her gaze, and to her amazement, he didn't glance past her at the building, at the tin, at the possibility of theft, guilt, trouble. He looked at her the way a person looks at the edge of a roof and decides that no one will fall today. She could not place why she believed that about his face, only that she did. She looked down at the babies because you look at truth only so long. Mason coughed, a wet sound that made the tiny hairs on her arms stand up. She heard Caroline's breath, then a ghost of a sound inside the cough. Leon flinched at the cough without fully knowing he did. The sound of lungs failing had threaded his childhood despite its distance. Once, a mother's bronchitis unaddressed because insurance was a luxury. Another time, a worker's cough that became a funeral. He had learned early that some sounds mean you move. He held out his arms, palms empty, invitation not command. "Hospital," he said, and the word was both destination and apology. The girl's chin trembled. She wanted to say no. She wanted to carry what she promised to carry without help, because help had a way of walking away midway. But she also wanted, fiercely and suddenly, to be 7 again for 1 hour and to have someone else make a decision about something loud and cruel and simple. She inhaled, smoothed the jacket as if it could dress her courage, and nodded once. The driver muttered something sharp and pragmatic into the radio. The city sucked in a breath. Leon took 2 steps forward, careful as if the sidewalk were a wire, and slid one bundle into the crook of his arm with a practice that should not have belonged to a man like him. He lifted the second without touching the child's face. The third he did not reach for, not until the girl shifted closer and placed the small, warm weight onto his shoulder as if laying a soft stone on an altar. Sam blinked up at Leon, and, for one suspended heartbeat so long it was almost a world, fell quiet. The air thinned. A bus belched smoke. Far away, a siren flowered. "Hospital," Izzy said again. Not a question this time, not a command, just the shortest bridge between fear and what might save you. Leon turned toward the open door and the waiting dark interior where air hummed cool. The driver swore in a hiss about lanes and luck and timing. Raphael, back in the conference room, checked his watch and sent a message that would remain unread. A woman at the bus stop paused, her mouth forming a small astonished "oh." Somewhere, a councilwoman's twin crow eyebrows rose though she could not possibly know why. It was then, at the curb's ragged edge, With 3 lives in his arms and the city's pulse pressing against his, that Leon felt something shift in the architecture of his day, a beam lifting, a hidden wall sliding, a blueprint remapped by a hand not his own. He took the first step toward the car and did not look back at the building that once had been a number on a proposal and had now, inexplicably, become a door. The hospital doors parted with that soft hydraulic sigh that always felt like a decision being made on your behalf. Inside, the air traded heat for sterile coolness, and the city's roar for a hum like a quiet engine. Leon took the front desk the way he approached a blueprint. Direct, hands steady, voice controlled. The clerk behind the glass lifted her eyes with the reflex of someone who spent the day sorting pleas from demands. She saw the suit, the expensive watch, the 3 blanketed lives distributed across 1 man and 1 child, and for a fraction of a breath the categories rewrote themselves. Emergency, Leon said. Newborns. 1 has a fever and a wet cough. We need a pediatrician now. Names of the children and the mother? The clerk asked, instinctively reaching for a form as if a form could catch a moving thing. Leon's mouth opened before his caution could wake. My children, he said. All 3. I'm their father. The lie slid out with the smoothness of a key that had been waiting in a pocket for years, warm from the heat of the body that concealed it. He felt the weight of it as he said it, the way a beam settles across joists, sudden, irrevocable, bearing. Izzy stood half a step back, both hands around the 3rd bundle, as if any handoff might dissolve it. Her eyes went to the clerk's face, and then to Leon's jaw, and then to the dotted rubber mat under her shoes, where an old boot print had embedded a starburst of dirt. She thought of Caroline's voice and how it had frayed like ribbon at the end. The clerk stilled, choosing. Leon recognized the micromotions, the thumb that stopped mid-drum on the desk edge, the pen laid down, but not released. He watched the moment the institution recalibrated to this new input. Follow the yellow line to pediatrics, she said, voice clipping the air. I will call ahead. Sir. A brief pause, the tiniest of tests. Senor Moore, is that correct? Yes. He did not blink. They moved. Leon first, a bundle balanced against his chest and another against his shoulder. Izzy small and fierce, feet carefully on the yellow paint that ran like a lifeline. The elevator was too slow for Leon's nerves, and yet the doors finally opened onto a corridor that smelled faintly of hand soap and something lemon sour that signaled both cleanliness and loss. They were met by a nurse with hair caught in a bun so tight it might have hummed under tension. Which one is febrile? She asked, already reaching for a thermometer, a cuff, a pulse oximeter. Mason, Izzy said, surprising them with her certainty. He grunts between swallows and his skin was hot when I changed him. He gets a little blue around the mouth for a second sometimes, but it goes away if I rub here. She demonstrated on the air, 2 fingers drawing circles between tiny shoulder blades. The nurse's briskness softened a degree. Good, she said. Good eyes. She took Mason with a competence that earned the privilege, unwrapping him with each motion counted and gentle. The oximeter clipped onto a toffee-colored foot. Numbers hiccuped and climbed. Leon shifted Noah to his other arm and felt the heat of the small spine through the blanket. He was intensely aware of his own hands, capable of signatures and specifications, palms familiar with stones and steel, and how new it felt to hold something that measured itself in grams and breaths rather than in units and profit. Sam blinked up from Izzy's arms with owlish insistence. A pediatric resident arrived, eyes still dressed in the tail end of a long night, and then another nurse, and then a pediatrician who seemed to come with her own weather of competence. Explanations were given and translated and layered. Upper respiratory infection, the pediatrician said, after a brief exam and a quick order for a chest film just in case. He is small, and so any fever matters. We will run labs. We'll hydrate, monitor, and support. The cough. She glanced at the chart. How long? 2 days, Izzy said. Yesterday less. Last night more. Her voice worked its way around the words the way roots find cracks in concrete. Okay. The doctor nodded, approving of data even when it came in a high, thin voice. We can do a chest x-ray. The other 2. Eating, sleeping, cranky. Leon's mouth surprised him again by participating in the story that had already begun to own him. No fever. No cough. He caught Izzy's quick look, half gratitude, half warning. and realized he had started to speak in we. Forms materialized like rain, registration, consent, contact information. The hospital was delicate where it needed to be, implacable where it must. Mother's name? The nurse asked, pen hovering. Something flickered across Leon's face. Caroline Harper. Izzy said, the syllables worn smooth with use. She died. She did not say respiratory. She did not say failed. She did not say last winter when the mountain smelled like metal. The nurse's pen moved. Father's name? Leon Moore, Leon said. And this time he understood that the lie was not a single event, but a corridor down which he had already taken several steps. He added a phone number that would ring on his nightstand, an address that made the nurse's eyebrows want to rise and then train themselves back to neutral. A printer somewhere began to click out paper like a patient metronome. A woman in a neat blazer entered the room, the kind of neat that didn't creak when it bent, and flashed an ID badge that announced social work without apology. Marcia Sanders, she said, not stretching out a hand because she could see both of Leon's were occupied and because she made a habit of letting the first handshake be chosen. Her eyes traveled the room in a 3-beat scan. Child, infants, man. She had built her career on separating lies that protect from lies that harm, and she could feel her instruments calibrate. Mr. Moore, she said, I understand you're the father. Leon held her gaze as if it were a plumb line. The words he wanted to say pressed at his teeth. The words he had to say in order to continue the motion they had started were not the same. Yes. Marcia had met enough river crossers to recognize both the risk and the intent. She let the words stand under observation. She crouched to Izzy's height, not because training suggested it, but because her knees were still young enough to do it, and because you learn more about a situation from below the adult's eye line than above it. Marcia, what are their names? Mason, Noah, and Sam, Izzy said. They're brothers. She waited, prepared to explain what brothers meant when people tried to divide them into paperwork. And you're Izzy, Marcia said without looking at a chart. You're 7. A nod. You did the right thing by coming. I didn't come, Izzy answered with a truth that didn't quite fit the space of the room. He stopped the car. Marcia followed the tilt of the child's jaw into the tiny, glittering engine of the situation. She turned to Leon. Here's how this works, she said, voice gentle but not adjustable. Children in medical crisis without a verified guardian trigger a duty of care process. There are 2 immediate paths while we verify history and safety. One is institutional care, placement in state custody, likely separate neonatal or infant foster placements, possibly in different homes given their ages and needs. The other is temporary kinship or community guardianship. An approved adult assumes legal responsibility, pending investigation. That adult must pass a basic check, home must be safe, and there are follow-up visits. Both are designed to protect. She didn't say both are designed to reduce liability. She said what she believed. Leon looked at the babies, at the small, furious knot of Izzy's hands. He heard institutional care, and the words rearranged themselves into separation, and something in him refused to carry that weight. A blueprint dropped in his mind, each line a choice. What is required for temporary guardianship? Today, he asked. The part of him that usually whispered about risk fell silent and let the part of him that built shelters speak. ID, background check, preliminary home suitability. We can do the first 2 in an hour. A home visit happens within 24. You must sign an affidavit. You're responsible for all medical decisions and care in the interim. If anything is out of order, the children move into state care immediately. This is not a fiction you can sustain if it's fiction. Izzy's attention traveled between their faces like a sparrow choosing a place to land. She felt the world tilt and had to lock her knees to keep it from sliding. She didn't like papers. Papers had a way of sending you somewhere. But when Marcia spoke of different homes, Izzy's lungs forgot how to be ribs around air. She put both palms flat against the glass side of the bassinet where Mason now lay, a tiny storm of wires and gentle beeps. We stay together, she said to the room. That's the rule. Marcia's eyes softened in a way that allowed no promise and yet conveyed an intention. I heard you. Leon nodded once at the same frequency. We'll do the checks, he said. I'll sign what's necessary. They stay together. And they come home with me. Marcia did not look surprised. She had a file cabinet brain. This scenario fit a narrow drawer labeled Strange Mercies. Then we move, she said, and things moved. An intake clerk performed a background check with the efficiency of a person who knows how slow systems break children and so hurries without being asked. The hospital's security officer made a discreet call to a friend in municipal records. Marcia called a colleague and then a judge's clerk and set a slim machine in motion that would spit out, if everyone kept their breath held just right, a temporary guardianship letter stamped and real. Leon's driver arrived with purchases as if the man had run through a list that appeared in his head unbidden. Diapers in 3 sizes because who knows? Wipes, small cotton hats because every baby in every photo seemed to be wearing one. 3 pale blue blankets, 3 bottles, 3 more bottles, formula by the tray, a pack of pacifiers in a clamshell case like jewels. He stood in the doorway awkward, a large man suddenly uncertain what to do with his hands in the face of small need. Izzy accepted 2 packs without commentary, inventorying silently. The way she tucked them into a plastic hospital drawer made Marcia recalibrate again. Survivors often have executive function that shames executives. Hours slipped by in measured increments. 30 minutes to lab results that suggested caution, not crisis. 20 to the radiology report that read clean. 60 to the letter with a judge's thick signature. Mason's fever lowered under a gentle fan of care. The pediatrician returned and, having seen how Izzy's hand steadied Mason's breath when the pulse dipped, asked her to show the nurse what she did. She did, and the nurse wrote down, in neat script, mother's trick. At the last threshold, when the letter was signed and the hospital-ready bag was zipped and the sun had shifted to slant blades across the corridor floor, Marcia pulled Leon aside. "I saw your name on the resettlement proposal," she said. "No accusation in it, just fact. You build in the places these children are found. You are also now the reason 3 of them will not vanish into separate files." She let the paradox hang between them like a mobile. Leon looked at the letter in his hand and the child by the door. He could see his life reflected in clean panes and in dirty ones. They did not look the same. "Both things are true," he said, because he had grown impatient with the part of himself that liked to be only one thing in any given conversation. "My job is to verify, then verify again," Marcia said. "I'll see you at your house at 8 this evening. If I find anything unsafe, the children come back with me. If I find everything safe, I recommend to the court that your temporary guardianship remains in force pending a fuller investigation." "What is safe?" Leon asked, because he had spent a lifetime buying safety in measured units and suspected the price was about to be something else. "A place to sleep that is theirs. A kitchen that has more than show. An adult who knows that being awake at 3 in the morning is a virtue, not a failure, when it comes to babies. Bathrooms without mold. Medications stored high. No guns. No unsecured pools. No doors that lock from the outside. And a sense, not easily quantified, that a child's emotions have permission to take up space." Leon nodded. "You'll find that," he said, and hoped the sentence would be true by the time the evening arrived. They left with the letter crisp in Leon's pocket and a sheaf of discharge instructions that made his mind stutter at the volume of small details that keep small people alive. The city had shifted into late afternoon, light, golden, and forgiving, traffic like a tide with opinions. When the car door closed, the quiet inside felt like a promise, or maybe like a held breath. Izzy buckled herself in with the intense seriousness of someone who had learned that straps matter. She watched the city through a square foot of glass as if it were a fragile film that could be replayed only once. "You lied," she said, voice soft enough not to wake Noah, who was folded in sleep against Leon's chest. "Yes," Leon said. He watched her head tilt like a bird's. "I lied to make something true that needed to be true immediately." He expected judgment. He received something else. "My mother lied to a policeman once," Izzy said, as if offering an amendment. "She told him we were going to my aunt's when we didn't have an aunt. It was to make him stop asking where we lived." He stopped. She thought about the kind of lies that become bridges you run across while they're still being built. She let silence place its hand lightly on both their shoulders. "We don't tell big lies," she added, mostly to herself. "Only the kind that open doors." Leon nodded. He could live inside that rule, at least for today. The house that received them was not a house built for children. It had polished wood that showed every print, a staircase that announced every step, shelves that displayed art that could shatter into 100 small warnings. But houses are treacherously fast at changing their minds about what they were for if you ask them with enough urgency. Mrs. Carmen Evans met them at the door, hands already clean, apron already tied, expression trying not to betray the pleased terror of a person whose universe just expanded without asking permission. Carmen had worked for Leon for 8 years. She knew his calendars and his coffee and the way he liked his mail sorted by decisions he could make in 30 seconds and those that required an hour's solitude. She had never once seen him carry anything smaller than a briefcase with the expression he currently wore. "My God," she breathed, and then, recalibrating to the sacred of the situation, crossed herself with quick fingers. 3. She grinned. 3 is the number of saints and trouble. "This is Izzy," Leon said. "She is 7. These are Mason, Noah, and Sam. We need 3 places to sleep, bottles, a system, and whatever else you think people like us don't know." He sounded like a man ordering concrete, except his voice had the softness men reserve for cathedrals and newborns. Carmen's own children were grown and out of the house, satellites that circled with Sunday calls and holiday visits. Her hands remembered infants as muscle memory remembers a song. "Guest room becomes nursery," she said, and her voice shifted gears into the practical. "Sheets can be folded tight to make a bassinet inside a drawer until real cribs arrive. The study can be a room for the little senorita. I will boil bottles. I will call Luisa down the street, who loaned me a pack-and-play last year for her niece. We can have 3 by nightfall if we promise to return them. I will wake the handyman. We will anchor everything that can fall." "Sir, Leon," she corrected herself at his look. "You must wash your hands so often your skin will think it's winter. And the shoes must be left at the door. And no one smokes here. I will murder anyone who tries." "No one smokes," Leon said with more gravity than the sentence deserved. They moved like a small, urgent army. Leon set up camp in the living room with a soft blanket and a triangle of pillows, and the list of discharge instructions spread like a map. Izzy watched him read. "Warm to body temperature," he murmured. "Tilt the bottle, keep the nipple filled, burp between sides. Sideline position for cough." He practiced the hold with Noah, the little body draped over his forearm, tiny ribs fluttering against skin he had always considered a private country. Carmen boiled a pot large enough to baptize a city in, dropping bottles and nipples with stainless steel plunks. She texted Luisa in bursts. 3 babies, yes 3, you read that right. God is showing off. Bring everything you have. Drawers were emptied of adult sweaters and filled with infant possibility. The study shook itself free of drafting tables and accepted a narrow bed with a clean quilt. Izzy moved through the house with the hesitancy of someone afraid their footprints would be studied. Carmen noticed and put a clean towel down on the kitchen island as a station just for her. "This is yours," she said. "For bottles, for little cloths, for keeping track. You will be our captain because you know their breath sounds. I will be your right hand." She spoke to Izzy like an equal and to the babies like votive candles. At 7:42, a text arrived from Marcia, 8 p.m., on time. The house hummed with the beauty of last-minute compliance. Carmen had covered outlets and relocated a sculpture that had sharp edges Leon had never noticed. Luisa arrived with 2 collapsible cribs and a bag of baby clothes whose tiny buttons looked like punctuation marks on a relieved sentence. Izzy inspected each item with ritual seriousness and placed 3 identical white onesies on the counter, then 3 soft hats, then 3 pairs of socks so small they felt like a joke. They fed the children in a rotation that was part art, part math. Izzy took Sam, and Sam watched her face as if it held a horizon line. Leon focused on Mason, counting the breaths between sips and the sips between coughs. Carmen, blessed Carmen, made sure that when burps came they surprised no one, and that when sleep arrived it found warm, made beds. The doorbell chimed at 8 exactly. Marcia entered with a notebook in her hand, and the kind of trained neutrality that keeps you honest even when you're trying very hard to look good. She took in the house, the large framed photograph of a job site at dawn, the bowl of keys, the careful order that suggested money had been applied to the problem of time. And then she let her gaze rest where it mattered. On the makeshift nursery, on the sterilizing station, on the little shelf where someone had placed 3 folded muslin cloths, as if preparing for communion. She walked through the rooms with purpose and returned to the living room with a checklist she could feel, but did not consult. "Where do they sleep?" she asked. Carmen led her to the guest room, where 3 borrowed cribs sat as if they had grown there. "This one is for Mason," she said, touching the rail lightly. "He is closest to the door in case of need." Marcia nodded, hearing the quiet triage embedded in the arrangement. "And Izzy?" Marcia asked. Carmen opened the study door. A clean bed, a small lamp, a shelf with 4 children's books that had not been there at lunch, a nightlight shaped like a moon, a soft rug where a child could kneel and tie laces or pray or both. Izzy stood at the threshold as if the room might evaporate under too much looking. "May I sit?" she asked. "It is your bed," Carmen said, and Izzy came forward and pressed a palm to the mattress as if testing whether it had a heartbeat. Marcia finished the tour in the kitchen, checked where the medication sat high in a cabinet with a childproof latch that even Leon struggled to open, noted the absence of hazards and the presence of a calendar now taped to the fridge where feedings had been logged in careful block letters. Mason 615, 30 milliliters. Noah 640, 30 milliliters. Sam 705, 30 milliliters. The handwriting at 615 was Leon's, surprisingly legible, math teacher steady. Sam's was Izzy's, small, a little slanted, fierce. She closed the notebook she had barely opened. "I'll file a recommendation to sustain the temporary guardianship," she said. "There will be visits. There will be a court date. There will be questions you won't enjoy. There will also be nights you won't sleep, mornings when you don't regret it, and afternoons when you will think you have made a mistake. When that happens, call me before you call the part of yourself that wants to be who you were yesterday." Leon exhaled without realizing he'd been bracing. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Marcia said with a private smile. "Thank the person who taught Izzy to count breaths and to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. That person has done most of my work for me." She looked at Izzy. "Are you safe here?" Izzy looked at the room that had become a plan, at the 3 small cribs, at Carmen's hands, at Leon's face. She answered the only way she could, which was by imagining how the air would feel if the answer were no, and then noticing that it did not feel that way. "We can stay together," she said. "That is not the same as safe," Marcia said, and waited. Izzy lifted her chin, a move she had learned from a woman who'd made it a habit. "It is for me." Marcia wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. She left with the door closing softly, a car pulling away, the neighborhood resuming its evening rhythm as if the day had not been rearranged by 4 signatures and 100 small acts. The night that followed was a river that changed banks without telling the water. Leon had held all-night vigil on job sites when a pour had to set under lights. He had stayed up for deals that bled into Tokyo mornings and London afternoons. This was different. Time fractured into 3-hour loops. Each one rotated 30 degrees off the last, so that sleep became something you could see on the other side of glass, but not touch. He learned to feed by the glow of a lamp he would not have chosen on any other day. He learned the miniature thunder that is a baby's hiccup and how it could undo his composure faster than a missed projection. He learned that rocking has a rhythm, and that if he found it, his mind quieted enough to notice the weight of a small skull against his forearm and how wonder can be heavy. At 3 in the morning, Mason's fever threatened, then retreated under a cool cloth and a whisper he had not known he was carrying. "Stay, stay, stay." At 4:30, Noah offered a smile that was an accident of muscle and mystery, and yet hit Leon's chest with the force of a verdict. At 5, Sam slept with his mouth open just enough to make a small "oh" that matched the shape Leon's life had been making all day. Izzy, somewhere in the cycle, fell asleep in the study, a book still open like a door on her chest. Carmen found her there at dawn and tucked a blanket around her with the soft arrogance of someone who believes in the harmlessness of love. The house, which had never had a reason to be awake for anything but alarms and markets opening in other time zones, learned the sound of small breathing and the sweeter sound of a child not yet required to wake before she was ready. When the sun returned to peer over the mountain, the city and the house pretended to be the same as yesterday. They were not. By the second morning, the list on the refrigerator had acquired a posted halo. Carmen's tidy script had multiplied: laundry schedule, formula prep ratios. A reminder that baths belong after warmth has filled a room and never before unless you like crying. Leon added columns, because of course he did, and then surprised himself by ignoring them when a small, immediate need announced itself like a doorbell. Packages arrived like weather. 3 cribs and flat boxes that weighed more than their boxy cheer suggested. Leon unpacked them with a satisfaction he usually reserved for the moment a crane set a prefabricated wall exactly where a pencil line said it should go. He learned the humble joy of the Allen wrench. He learned the indignity of chasing a rogue dowel under a couch while a baby performed an opera in a nearby room. Izzy sat cross-legged near the instruction leaflets, interpreting diagrams with a seriousness architects respect in each other. "This piece is like a ladder," she said, pointing. "So it should stand like ladders stand." She was right. She was often right. Carmen turned the kitchen into a laboratory whose output was comfort. Bottles sterilized in ranks. Formula measured with the exactness of a pharmacist and the looseness of a grandmother. A pot of oatmeal simmered for the adults, and then cooled to soft for anyone else whose day required gentleness. She installed a small basket near the sink labeled cloths because she had learned that in chaos, labels are mercy. The babies developed personalities that refused to wait. Mason, recovered but cautious, wore a furrow in his tiny forehead that presaged a boy who would always check doors twice. Noah believed in immediate protest followed by immediate forgiveness. Sam watched, always watched, as if pulling patience out of the air and storing it behind his eyes. Leon's phone vibrated on the counter with the energy of a small, trapped animal. Meetings rescheduled, investors curious, a partner irritated at a postponed site visit, a city official delighted to have caught him at a bad week. He let it vibrate until the sound became part of the house's new music and not its metronome. At 10 a.m., he canceled a boardroom filled with chairs that would be warm from bodies. At 2, he didn't show up to a lunch where the salad would have been precisely salted and the conversation precisely predatory. He wrote emails that were simple and honest and therefore confusing to people who traded primarily in advantage. Family emergency. Will be unavailable for 2 weeks. Delegate to Raphael and Miriam. Decisions on non-critical path postponed. Thank you. The first walk in the neighborhood felt like an act of theater. Carmen insisted on hats and blankets even though the sun was kind and the breeze flirted with being a breeze. Izzy wanted to push the stroller but had to accept a compromise. She would walk beside it with one hand, always touching the bar. She did so with the absolute attention of a guard at a museum protecting the only painting anyone had come to see. Neighbors performed their curiosity. Louisa introduced them to a woman who had an aunt who ran a daycare and who knew what kind of cloth diaper held truth. An older man on a stoop blessed the children with a cross, so elaborate the air might have held the shape for a second. A teenager in a hoodie leaned against a wall and watched with the baffled tenderness of someone whose world had, uninvited, grown larger by 3. "Do they all eat at the same time?" a woman asked, as if it were a moral question. "They eat when they are hungry," Izzy answered with a neutrality only monks and 7-year-olds can achieve. "They sleep?" the woman tried, not ready to concede. "They sleep when they are done being awake," Leon said, surprising himself with the simplicity. The woman laughed and left them a small bag of oranges anyway. In the afternoons, when the sun turned the living room into a lake of light, Izzy colored at the low table Carmen had pulled from the attic, the one with the sturdy legs and the chips that told a history of dropped toys and spilled juice. She drew mountains and a house and a large jacket that had become a roof. She drew 3 small circles and one larger one under it. She drew a line that connected the circles and wrote the word promise in careful, slow letters across it like a bridge. Leon learned the particular quiet that descends when a baby finally falls asleep, the shoulder posture you adopt so as not to betray your relief with noise, the way even the floorboards agree to be a fraction softer. He learned to wrap an infant in a swaddle that resembled both a sail and a vow. He learned that, when panic rises at 2 in the morning because someone's breath takes a beat too long between beats, you can count to 3 out loud, and in doing so teach both the child and yourself that time still moves. On day 4, the resettlement project knocked with the unembarrassed knuckles of money. A meeting could not be postponed without cost. Raphael came in person rather than call, a peace offering in the shape of effort. He stood in the doorway in a shirt that did its best to be casual and peered at the tricrib constellation with an expression that didn't match any of his practiced ones. "You look terrible," he told Leon, which, between friends, is a kind of blessing. "I'm excellent," Leon said. which between men who have witnessed each other's ambition was either the truest or the most unhelpful answer. Walk, he added, gesturing to the back garden so that voices could rise without waking Princess. They paced the perimeter of a lawn that had never been asked to host negotiations more intimate than those between Dandelion and Gardner. Raphael laid out the math. Penalties, delays, a potential investor from Madrid with a taste for turning neighborhoods into brochures. Leon listened and felt his usual calculus strain and then fail under a new variable. We move slowly, he said finally. We overpay for dignified relocation. We collaborate with the councilwoman instead of outmaneuvering her. And we announce a child care stipend for every family for 2 years. Raphael's face did an extraordinary thing. He stopped performing understanding and manufactured the real thing on the spot. This is not how you do it, he said, not as scold, but as observation. It is how I do it now, Leon answered. The sentence surprised them both in how easily it stood up on its own legs. You will have to sell something, Raphael said after a beat. The margins you love will hate you. Leon looked through the windows at a house where a child had hung her drawing with tape that would pull paint if he wasn't careful. Then we sell something. He said it the way you say a word you've known forever and somehow never used correctly. That evening he called an advisor and began the paperwork to divest 2 small companies that had offered profit and no joy. He expected a sensation like loss and felt instead a making of room. The way you feel when you finally give away the coat you kept out of habit and winter fits you better without it. Marcia returned on day 5 with a clipboard she never consulted and a face that never pretended it hadn't seen worse. She asked questions over the soft slap of a baby's hand on a blanket. Has anyone been here who shouldn't? Has anyone offered help that felt like a lie? Has anyone insisted on holding a child while you remembered something about their eyes you didn't like? Carmen answered in a staccato that made Marcia smile. Leon answered with a thoughtful slowness that suggested he understood why the questions were shaped like that. Izzy didn't answer at all, which was, for once, exactly right. At the edge of week 1, Izzy put on the uniform of the neighborhood school and stood in front of the hallway mirror like a person meeting her own future. The skirt felt odd. The shoes fit on the second try. Carmen fussed with a loose thread and then apologized for fussing and then fussed again. Leon crouched without wrecking his knees and tied the laces with care that made a lump rise in his throat. He had not tied a child's shoe since he had been the child with the shoe. In the car, Izzy sat with her backpack square against her small spine, hands folded on her lap, as if she were certain someone would ask for proof of something. They didn't. The teacher at the door had ash-blonde hair and a kindness that was not performed. She knelt, a move that always earns a child's willingness to be seen, and said, "You must be Izzy. We've been waiting." Izzy looked at her without defense and, after a careful beat, walked inside. Leon stood by the car a moment longer than necessary, the morning asking him to admit that his chest had just made a new shape around an old need. When he returned home, the house did a small chorus of morning noises to announce itself as alive. A kettle closing, a baby's pre-cry question, Carmen humming a tune that had no beginning. He added his own sound to the choir by laughing at Sam's hiccup and by saying Mason's name until Mason's eyes focused and then softened at the recognition that he had a name and that someone liked saying it. The schedule became both brutal and saving. Feedings at midnight and 3 and 6 and 9. Izzy's pickup at 2. A nap that nobody took. Baths that became a wet confessional. Laundry that forgave nothing and therefore taught diligence. Some nights they were an orchestra. Some nights they were a drumline. Leon kept a running list in his head of things he would never again consider small. A burp, a diaper that fit, a fever that fell. The first time Noah wrapped a hand around his index finger with ferocious concentration and refused to let go, as if he had been assigned the task of holding down a kite. He began to understand the architecture of tiredness. There was tiredness that sharpened, tiredness that blurred, tiredness that insisted you cry without asking for permission. He learned when to hand the baton to Carmen, when to let Izzy lead, when to step outside for 5 minutes and stand under the guava tree and breathe like a person who had just remembered that the body knows how. Under the leaves, he drafted emails that sold companies he had built with a kind of love that did not ask anything back. He typed signatures as if they were exits and noticed he didn't feel like he was leaving anything, only arriving somewhere he could not have budgeted for. He also learned the topography of Izzy's fears. Some of them were named: separation, hospitals, men who looked too long and asked too few questions, paper with stamps. Some were unnamed but announced by small tells: a knee bouncing, a hand flattening itself against a door frame as if memorizing the texture in case the door disappeared, the way she listened for sirens even when they were far. He learned that she could instruct him perfectly on how to burp Sam and yet freeze when a policeman crossed at the corner 2 blocks away. He didn't say it's fine because he had stopped believing in that spell. He said, "I see him too." And then, when she nodded, and he's walking away. 2 weeks in, Marcia arrived unannounced in the middle of a mid-morning reprieve when all 3 babies had, miraculously, dozed at once and Carmen had dared to pour coffee into a cup that announced itself as hot in 3 languages. "I don't like surprises," she said to Leon at the door, "but I like lies less, and surprise is a good way to step on them." She took a tour so swift and kind it felt like a blessing. She sniffed the air for smoke and the sink for neglect and the tilting edge of secrets. She found none worth writing about, which, in her world, was a win you celebrated by going home on time. At lunch that day, Leon fed Sam while standing, the way one feeds when one has forgotten how to do one thing at a time. Sam's mouth paused around the bottle and then opened in a round experiment. He looked at Leon and made a sound that was not a word, but not one either. It was the softest syllable a mouth can make. It landed, as all firsts do, with a new gravity. Izzy, who had been arranging crayons in spectral order, looked up sharply. Carmen froze with a spoon midair. Leon swallowed. "Did he?" "Shoo," Izzy said, eyes wide as the hallway nightlight. She tilted her head toward Sam and waited. The baby tried again, gums working around the effort of making intention into sound. "Pa," he said, then stopped, then said the second half like a secret. "Pa." It was not a title yet. It was a sound, but it rushed through the room like weather. Carmen found her eyes wet and allowed it as if someone had opened a hymn book in her chest. Izzy smiled a small, careful smile, as if the air might drop it if it got too big. Leon closed his eyes for a beat that was long and free and dangerous. When he opened them, he was the same and not. He did not look at Marcia's last report on the counter. He looked at a child who had named a shape and decided to wear it for a moment like a hat. That afternoon Marcia called, not because she had heard the word, she had not, but because she had been thinking about this house and this odd arrangement that had grown around an emergency like ivy around a broken fence. "Court has set a preliminary date," she said. 10 weeks from now. Permanent custody hearing. I'll prepare you. It won't be entertainment. It will be arithmetic and blood. Tell the truth. Don't try to be inspiring. Judges have allergic reactions to speeches. "How do we prepare, Izzy?" Leon asked, and his voice made the question bigger than paperwork. He had sat in hearings where money had argued with the air. He had never sat in one where a child's promise was the primary witness. "Tell her what you can control and what you can't," Marcia said. "Do not promise outcomes. Promise behaviors. Promise presence." Leon looked into the living room, where Izzy now lay on her stomach reading a book about a fox and a star, hand near Sam's foot, even in leisure. "I can promise to be there," he said. "I can promise to tell the truth." "Good," Marcia said. "And teach her that being 7 is not a condition she has to apologize for in court." He heard her smile. "And buy a nicer shirt." The weeks climbed a ladder. Izzy started bringing home worksheets that said things like circle the picture that matches the word in handwriting too cheerful for the task. She did so with the intensity of a person who understands that being asked is itself a kind of grace. She made a friend named Valentina who had 2 fathers and a laugh that made the hallway feel like a trampoline. She told Leon, one night before sleep, that school was strange because everyone assumed you had a favorite color and she was still deciding what hers had been before winter. Leon told the company lawyer to draft the childcare stipend in language that did not leave room for loopholes and to expect to be made fun of in rooms where men laughed at things until the minute they became policy. He attended a resettlement meeting and said, "We move people like treasure rather than like debris," and kept talking through the polite silence as if it were simply a patch of fog on a road he knew well. Carmen taught Leon to distinguish between cries with the precision of a sommelier. Hunger cry, gas cry, I dropped into the gap cry, I woke and the world didn't remember me cry. He got it wrong often and then less often, which felt like growth equal to divestitures. And one night, When the baby slept in a cord and the moon hovered over the mountain like it had been pinned there by a child's thumb, Izzy crept down the hall to Leon's office. He sat with a pen held above a document that needed only a signature to set two small companies on a new path that had nothing to do with him. She stood at the threshold because even brave creatures know where doors are. "Are you busy?" she asked. "I am trying not to be," he said. He put the pen down. She came into the room with the careful step of someone who knows how to move through quiet. She climbed into the chair across from him and folded her legs beneath her the way cats do when they decide a place is theirs. "I know about the court," she said. "I'm not a baby. I hear things I don't understand all the time. I keep them like pebbles until I know what they are." Leon nodded. "We will go," he said. "We will answer questions. A judge will listen. Marcia will help. We will tell the truth. We will not let anyone pull you into a story that isn't yours." She studied him, that relentless, tender study that had begun to change him cell by cell. "If they say no," she said, and then stopped. Because even brave questions can be too big to finish on the first try. "If they say no," he said, "we will find the next yes. And while we look, we will stay together in every way that counts. I will not let you be alone with scary thoughts." She was silent long enough that he heard the minute click of the house cooling. "You let me be a child," she said at last, her voice as plain and radical as bread. "Sometimes I don't remember how. You remember for me." He had signed many things that turned land into buildings and buildings into returns. He had never felt the sense of contract he felt then. "I will keep remembering," he said. She nodded and, satisfied in a way that allowed sleep to exist again, slid off the chair. At the door she turned. "Also," she said with casual ferocity, "if we go to court and someone tries to separate us, I will tell the judge an important thing." "What thing?" "That babies leak like secrets if you're careless," she said. "And that you don't leak." He laughed, the kind of laugh that repairs a person in small places. "I will buy a nice shirt," he said. "Make it soft," she advised, because she understood courtrooms and colic and what touches skin. She patted back down the hall, a small figure who had dragged a house into its better self and then granted it permission to rest. Toward morning, when the sky was still the color of unasked questions, one of the babies stirred and then returned to sleep without help. Leon lay awake and allowed himself to name the thing forming in his chest without euphemism. It was not obligation. It was not penance for wealth. It was not a clever story for a magazine profile about philanthropy. It was simple and dangerous and loud even when quiet. It had the same shape as the word Sam had made, but it did not require letters to be true. He closed his eyes and did not sleep and did not mind. The house breathed with him, as if it too had learned that sometimes the work is the waking. Outside, the city rehearsed its morning. Inside, for small people, 3 new, 1 reborn, turned a man's empire into a home and called it good. The week after Sam's round, soft syllable, the house began to keep its own calendar. The mornings opened like accordions: stretch, breathe, feed, change, nap, repeat, folded and unfolded until the day earned its closing. On the refrigerator, the grid of squares acquired not just times and milliliters, but tiny checkmarks beside words like bath and tummy time and call school about library card. Carmen added a corner for jokes because she believed houses should laugh where they plan. Izzy contributed the first entry in careful block letters. Why did the baby sleep? Because the night got tired first. Leon, who once believed time was what you bent, learned time was what you carried. He carried it down the stairs at 3 a.m. He carried it into the sunlight like a blanket. He carried it in his pocket to meetings and pulled it out when the meeting tried to steal it. He took calls with a baby breathing against his collarbone and noticed how voices changed when people heard the hush of an infant in the background. Some softened, some hurried. A few grew annoyed as if the sound of new life were an interruption rather than the point. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain deciding, he took Izzy to the school's tiny library. Books leaned at angles on low shelves, spines patient. The librarian wore earrings shaped like pencils and greeted them with the ritual of names. "We have a window seat," she told Izzy. "It is for reading, and for staring when reading is taking a break inside your head." Izzy tried the window seat like a person tests a raft. She picked a book about maps because maps tell the truth about where you are even when you wish they'd lie. Leon stood in the aisle, holding Sam, pretending to read a parenting guide, while actually counting the number of times Izzy smiled without permission. He counted 5 before she noticed him counting and made a face that said stop. Outside, the city took its own attendance. Markets opening, buses exhaling, a jackhammer 3 streets overdoing its argument with asphalt. Leon drove past the husk of the building where Izzy had learned to make promises louder than fear. The caution tape fluttered like a skirt. He felt the old blueprint muscle twitch, and then still. He had meetings nearby and did not stop. Not because he was indifferent, but because he was learning not to visit the past more than it visited him. That afternoon, a municipal hearing unfurled like an unflattering portrait. The council chamber smelled of recycled air and coffee that had given up. Leon sat at the long table with his lawyer and a stack of renderings, the kind of glossy pages meant to seduce the skeptical. Across from him, Councilwoman Duarte lifted a brow with the ancient skill of politicians who had seen decades of men with plans. "Mr. Moore," she said, "your project assumes relocation of 87 families from buildings that have not been legally occupied for years and have nonetheless become homes. You've revised your proposal to include a child care stipend and a promise of in-neighborhood rehousing. Some call this a concession. I call it a beginning. Convince us that you understand the difference." Leon could feel Raphael's foot nudge his ankle. Don't improvise policy in a microphone. He looked up at the chamber instead, at the rows of faces set in expressions a city wears when it is exhausted by change that always chooses the same streets. He took a breath. "I am a builder," he said. "I like schedules and clean edges. I hate waste. For years I used those preferences to justify speed. The last month has taught me that speed can look like carelessness wearing efficiency as a costume. We will move slowly and pay for the slowness. We will overcommunicate. We will not use police to enforce timelines. We will sign leases before we move people. And we will let families pick from more than one option so choice doesn't feel like a trick." He stopped there. He did not tell a story about a 7-year-old because he was learning to keep sacred things out of rooms that grind them into applause. Silence followed, the listening kind. Duarte glanced down at his filings, then at him. "We will hold you to your own words," she said. "And to mine." At home, Carmen supervised a bath with the gravitas of a ceremony. "Warm the room first," she insisted, opening the bathroom door to let steam saturate the air. "We are not baptizing in a river." Izzy stood on a step stool in an apron Carmen had constructed from an old dish towel and coached Noah through the shock of water. "It's okay," she murmured, using the tone she reserved for stubborn zippers and thunder. "Water is just sky that forgot how to float." Leon, who had negotiated millions with a phone pressed to his ear, found himself afraid of soap near eyes the size of coins. He learned to rinse with a hand like a roof. He learned to clip tiny nails without trembling. He learned to let Carmen laugh softly when he flinched and to laugh with her. On Thursday, the hospital called to schedule a follow-up for Mason. Lungs clear now, but eligible for the caution reserved for those who had scared people. The nurse's voice was brisk kindness. "You're doing well," she said. "That much is obvious from the chart." Leon smiled at a chart he could not see because it meant someone besides him was counting good things. A week later, an unmarked sedan idled at the curb and disgorged an inspector with a clipboard and the expression of a man used to seeing the corners where care fails. He moved through the rooms with professional suspicion, took photos of outlets and crib slats and the absence of loose cords near windows. He peered at the undersink where Carmen had staged the cleaning supplies like soldiers behind a locked gate. He asked a question about fire extinguishers, and Leon gestured to 2, one near the kitchen, one in the hall. The inspector sniffed, wrote a note that could have been a demerit or a compliment, and left. Carmen exhaled a prayer in Spanish that involved saints and city budgets. Izzy, who had watched from the doorway with her chin tilted, asked whether men with clipboards ever bring flowers. "Rarely," Carmen said, "but sometimes they bring their eyes awake, and that is almost as useful." News found them despite their lack of invitation. A speculative piece appeared in an online magazine. Construction king turns caregiver. Investors wonder if softness scales. Raphael texted a link, and the words "ignore, we have a life." Leon didn't click. He folded laundry and wondered at the small joy of pairing socks not much larger than his thumbs. He wondered how a person measured return on investment when the investment was sleep and the return was a fever that did not return. Izzy made a game of the stairs, quiet like clouds, fast like squirrels, careful like librarians carrying a secret. She began to bring home new words from school and tested them on the babies. Hypothesis, she told Mason one morning, means a guess in a lab coat. He blinked solemnly, which she took as agreement. She explained fractions to Noah with crackers, dividing them in careful halves, and then smaller halves, eating the experiment with scientific gravity. Sam listened, eyes bright with a curiosity that did not bother with definitions. He reached for her hair and tangled his fingers in it like a kite. At night, when the mountain wore its string of lights like a necklace, Leon sometimes stood at the back door and thought about the boy he had been. A young man carrying rebar on a site where older men judged him by how much bulk he could accumulate with sweat. He thought about the first time a lender took him seriously and the last time he had believed a contract could make a person good. He thought about how none of that had prepared him for the simplicities of this house. Say yes when the cry is real. Say no when the danger is invisible. Say nothing when the moment is busy making its own meaning. He let the night do its work and went back inside, where 3 small bodies taught him to renegotiate with sleep. On a Friday that risked heat then didn't deliver, he took Izzy to a shoe store because her school shoes made her walk like revenge. The clerk measured her foot with a silver device and announced numbers with the satisfaction of a person whose job is precise. Izzy picked blue shoes because it turned out blue had wanted her all along. On the way home, in a stoplight's mercy, she asked a question without looking at him. If you were not here that day, and I was, would I have done what you did? You already did, he said, understanding later than she did. You did the hardest part first. She nodded, thread pulled through the fabric of the thought. The light changed. The day continued. The house waited with its list and its jokes and the space on the couch where Izzy liked to sit with one foot tucked under as if she needed to be anchored to stay. The Madrid investor came to town wearing a suit the color of polished storms and a grin composed of curiosities. He toured the site with Leon and Raphael, admired the views, made the usual comments about Medellin reinventing itself, suggested a boutique gym on the 12th floor. We are aligned, he declared, which is a thing men say when they hope the numbers will forgive their next sentence. But this slow ethics you are attempting will flatten margins. I fear you are letting sentiment build buildings. Leon had an infant sock in his jacket pocket, a talisman misplaced by laundry and rescued by accident. He rolled the cotton between his fingers as if it could remind him how small was also true. Margins have handled worse, he said. We will make money after we make dignity. The investor laughed in the register of men who own islands. And if the city grows bored of your nobility, then I will grow boring building elsewhere, Leon said. But not this one. Not like before. He expected fury. He received, to his surprise, calculation. The investor's grin shifted half an inch toward respect. You have the luxury, the man said, of saying it out loud. Leon didn't explain that luxury is sometimes a synonym for choice and sometimes a synonym for finally being willing to pay. He sold 2 companies that week, a mid-sized materials supplier that had nourished his early expansion and a smaller logistics firm he had convinced himself he needed in order to sleep. Contracts clicked signatures down the line like a train finding its track. Raphael poured whiskey and told him he was either mad or finally sane enough to be unpredictable. Miriam, the attorney whose emails read like clean rooms feel, drafted the announcement with care. The rumor mill tried to turn sacrifice into scandal and sputtered when the scandal didn't arrive. Marcia came by with a file thick enough to be heavy and set it on the dining table as if it were a guest. This is the part that feels worse than it sounds, she warned. We catalog before we recommend. We list the fact that Izzy has a bed and the direction the bed faces as if the cardinal points predict affection. We record the baby's weight gains in grams. We note the absence of bruises. We count photographs on the walls that suggest permanence. We read reports from school. We call your neighbors. We ask people to tell us if you are impatient at the grocery store. She opened the file like a book about a family she was trying to remember was real. You will feel reduced to facts. The facts are the ladder we use to climb out of the pit of opinion. Climb, Leon said, because he had no interest in pits unless they were foundations properly poured. Izzy sat beside him with elbows off the table, determined to behave in ways tables like. Will the judge read all of that? She asked, eyeing the stack like a mountain she preferred to roll down. Some, Marcia said. Her clerk will read more. But what the judge will look for is not hidden. She will look at you when you talk about your brothers. She will look at Leon when one of them cries during the hearing and see whether his hands rise without thinking. She will look at whether people who do not love you say you are safe. Izzy considered this, then nodded as if adding it to a set of instructions she accepted as difficult but not unfair. When is it? She asked. 2 months, Marcia said. We will keep that month short. The babies lengthened in increments the way sunshine lengthens a day, stealthy and undeniable. Mason discovered his feet and frowned at them like an inspector frowning at a new code. Noah discovered his laugh, a sudden bell that startled even him. Sam discovered that rolling could be a method, not just an accident, and used it to migrate across a blanket with the determination of a pilgrim. Izzy came home from school with a crayon portrait labeled My Family. For small bodies in a row, a tall figure with round hair she claimed was Carmen's bun, a taller figure with hair she forgot to draw because adults blur. She had drawn herself with a blue dress and a smile that crooked at one end because she could never quite make symmetry obey. She hung it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like an avocado, the seed enormous in proportion to the fruit. It's a map, she said when Leon admired it, of where I go when I think. They went to the pediatrician for the first round of vaccinations, a visit that rearranged the afternoon into a series of anticipations and regrets. Carmen prepared tiny thighs with lotion ritual. Izzy negotiated bravado with bribes. Leon practiced staying calm face muscles. The shots landed, the cries rose and ebbed, and Leon learned that some kinds of pain are the tax you pay for safety later. He also learned that a sticker declaring I was brave can make a 7-year-old glow like a lighthouse, even if the sticker is primarily intended for toddlers. He asked for one for himself and wore it on his collar all day until a smear of formula replaced its glue and it wandered off. At night, Izzy began to sleep deeper. Carmen called it the school effect. Leon called it the mercy effect. One particular night, when the city's motor was low and forgiving, he woke to a quiet he didn't trust. He went room by room with the flashlight on his phone held low, not wanting to turn the house into a stage. He found 3 steady rises and falls of tiny chests and a 4th in the study. Izzy curled around a stuffed rabbit that had arrived in a box from a client in Bogota who had declined to sign a contract and had sent a gift instead. Leon stood in the doorway and felt the unfamiliar impulse to memorize a piece in case he needed to reconstruct it from scraps later. The call that broke the easy rhythm came on a Thursday morning while he was teaching Mason to grasp his index finger and pull as if he were ringing a bell. Miriam's voice was level because that's what it is paid to be. The court advanced the preliminary, she said. An opening in the docket. It's now in 5 weeks. Is that good? Leon asked, already disassembling his calendar with his mind like a man takes apart an engine to understand it. It is what it is, Miriam said, which is a thing lawyers say when they love you enough to keep you from rehearsing panic. We will be ready. But the shorter runway means the other side. Don't grimace. There is always another side. We'll have less time to love you. Expect sharper questions. Expect less patience for poetry. He looked down at the small hand wrapped around his finger. We will answer in sentences, he said. Not poems. He told Izzy after school under the tree near the corner where the city offered a little shade as apology for its long afternoons. She nodded, face older than 7 for 2 seconds, and then 7 again because someone's bicycle bell trilled a joke nearby. I can tell them about the rule, she said. What rule? He asked, though he knew. We stay together, she said. That one. He was quiet. We will tell them, he said. We will also tell them why. So it is not just a rule, but a reason. That evening, he drafted a statement for the resettlement project that would go to the press, language that held both steel and apology. He had learned that apologies only mean anything when they come with math. He attached not a promise, but a budget, not a rendering, but a timeline that acknowledged the inconvenience of slowness and named it as virtue. Raphael read it and sent back a single word, finally. At home, Carmen cooked arroz con pollo in a pot wide enough for a family and told Izzy to taste for salt. Izzy closed her eyes like a judge listening to an argument. Needs more, she decreed. And Carmen laughed so loud the babies smiled in their sleep because happiness has a way of leaking into other rooms. Leon ate 2 bowls and thought about how hunger changes shape when it is fed by people rather than by victory. The next day brought a surprise visit from a woman with a camera around her neck who claimed to be doing a human interest story on families formed by emergency. Marcia, who somehow knew within an hour, called and instructed an artful, polite refusal. "Not now," she said. "Later, you can decide if your privacy is a luxury or a boundary. For now, assume every story costs what you cannot afford." Leon closed the door gently. Izzy asked why. "Because sometimes a picture steals more than it gives," he said. She accepted it because children understand theft even when they have not named all its forms. They practiced for court without calling it practice. They told the truth at dinner out loud, small truths first. Who left the bottle on the counter, who kicked the blanket off in a fit, who forgot to sign the reading log. Then bigger truths on a Saturday afternoon walk when a stray dog followed them for 3 blocks and then chose a different family. "I don't like judges," Izzy confessed, not because she had met one, but because the word tasted like being told to stand in a corner. "I like teachers. Teachers listen longer." Leon didn't argue. He promised to be a teacher in a room that preferred rulers. On a Sunday that felt like a school notebook, clean, full of squares, Leon took the babies to the park while Izzy attended a birthday party with Valentina, cake and balloons, and the chaos of sugar. He sat on a bench and watched 3 strollers like a general surveying a line. A man sat beside him with the weary smile of a fellow traveler. "Twins?" the man asked, pointing at 2. "Triplets," Leon said, and the man's eyebrows climbed over the fence of his forehead. "God has jokes," the man said. Leon almost told him they had been born without a punchline, and then decided the joke had turned into a gift that didn't mind the misnaming. When they got home, a letter waited in the mailbox with the court's crest inked in blue. He opened it with the calm of a person who has memorized how paper rustles. The date sat there, heavy but inert. He wrote it on the refrigerator calendar in neat numbers, and then, in a small hand beneath, wrote the words "Bring patience." He did not write win. He did not write fight. He wrote "Bring patience" because he had learned you do not win families. You do not fight children. You show up with enough patience for the person in front of you and the person you used to be. The court date breathed down the length of the month until it fogged the mornings. In the kitchen, the calendar shed its post, its jokes, and grew serious with appointments. Pediatrician follow-up, meeting with Miriam to practice answers, school performance, 2 paper crowns. Marcia home visit, unannounced, by shirt, soft. Leon ironed the shirt himself and scorched nothing, a small triumph. Carmen approved the fabric with a pinch of finger and declared the collar friendly. Izzy stood in the doorway, studied him, and said, "You look like a principal in a movie who is actually nice," which was new territory for a man who had played antagonist in more boardrooms than he'd admit. Miriam ran them through rehearsals in the living room like a coach who understands that winning looks like not losing your breath. "Do not volunteer," she said. "Do not fix their question into a better one. Answer what is asked. Let silence be your friend when they expect it to make you nervous. And Leon, when they ask about the hospital, you will say the sentence we practiced. You will not embroider it into a hero costume. I lied to get them seen because one of the children had a fever and cough. I told the truth as soon as a social worker entered the room." Leon recited, like a person confessing and explaining without trying to be forgiven. "Yes," Miriam said. "And when they ask you whether you can guarantee these children will never be hurt in your home, what will you say?" "I can guarantee they will never be hurt by neglect," Leon answered. "I can guarantee we will be present, awake, and learning. I can guarantee we have systems for safety and people for when systems fail. I cannot guarantee the world outside our door." He swallowed. "I can guarantee the door." "Good," Miriam said. "And Izzy, when the judge asks why staying together matters, you say." Izzy sat with her hands folded as if this were a test she had chosen to take. "Because when you break a promise, the pieces cut you," she said. "And because my brothers don't know yet that I am their sister. They know the sound of my voice and my hands. If they sleep in other houses, they will think they were wrong about the voice and the hands." She paused. "And because my mother asked me to keep them together, and I told her yes. If you make me break it, I will still be a person, but I will be a person who broke it." Miriam was human enough to close her eyes for a second and let the sentence be useful without needing to perfect it. "Say it like you just said it," she said. "Don't tidy it up for adults." The babies learned to sit with help as if practicing for the courtroom too. Upright, wobbly, determined. Mason's skeptical brow suggested he would be the juror who demanded more evidence. Noah's grin suggested he would acquit everyone based on vibes. Sam's watchfulness promised a dissenting opinion that could become law in time. They wore identical white shirts to a checkup and looked, for a moment, like a panel convened to decide whether the ceiling light was trustworthy. On the last night before the hearing, the house dimmed itself in consideration. Carmen set out outfits on the backs of chairs. Izzy's blue dress with a cardigan because climate control is a tyrant. Leon's soft shirt and suit, socks that did not announce themselves. She packed a bag with diapers, wipes, a bottle, a change of clothes for each infant, snacks that did not crumble into graph paper of crumbs. She kissed each baby's forehead as if stamping a passport. "No crying tomorrow," she told them, and then made the sign of the cross, which is the same thing as saying cry if you must, we'll be there. Izzy found Leon in his office. Lights low, the desk cleared of everything but a pen and a stone from a beach he had once thought the height of leisure. She stood at the threshold, the way she often did, respecting the border between rooms without letting it boss her. "I know it is tomorrow," she said. "Even if no one says it, the house says it." He swiveled the chair so he faced her fully. "The house is honest," he said. "It has learned it from its people." She crossed the room in 3 careful steps and climbed into the chair opposite. "If they say we cannot stay," she said, voice steady in the way voices are when they have cried already in private, "I want you to keep the babies together. They should not go 3 places. They should go 1 place. Maybe you can have one of them, and I can." She stopped, caught the sentence with both hands, and pulled it apart as if it were a knot she refused to tighten. No, that is not correct. They go together, even if they go away from me." He had rehearsed hard questions with Miriam. He had not rehearsed this one because you don't rehearse requests that insist on breaking you. He leaned forward and let his elbows find the desk the way tiredness finds a bed. "Listen to me," he said, quietly, the way one speaks to someone inside a dream. "I built things for 20 years and never once did I know, as clearly as I know this, what I was actually building. We will go tomorrow and tell the truth, plain. We will not negotiate against ourselves tonight. And if the judge cannot see what is obvious to anyone who has stood in our kitchen, then I will move the sky. I will file. I will appeal. I will refuse polite defeat. I will not accept the version of the world where promises made to dying women are optional." She studied him the way she studies maps, looking for routes that make sense and for rivers that might drown you. "I don't want you to sell all your buildings," she said, suddenly very young for exactly 2 seconds. "Then we will not have a house. Houses are expensive." "We have a house," he said. "We have 3 cribs. We have Carmen. We have a refrigerator with a ridiculous calendar. We have a drawer where the spoons live and a shelf where your books pretend to stand still. We are not poor in anything I intend to keep." "Okay," she said. She let a breath out and watched it steady the room. "Can I ask one more?" "Ask 10. If the judge asks why you lied, and you say the sentence, and she still looks like a statue, can I say that sometimes adults lie when paper is slower than a fever?" "Yes," he said, a smile arriving without permission. "Say exactly that." She slid off the chair, then paused, then returned long enough to lay her palm on the desk near his hand, not touching but close. "You make me feel like I can be 7, she said. "That is the thing." "I know," he said, because she had told him once already, and some truths you receive multiple times until they fit. She went to bed. He sat in the dark and let the house breathe around him. The soft click of someone, Carmen, washing a last dish, the sigh of the air through the vents like the house trying out a whistle, the nearly invisible sound of a night-keeping watch. He wrote nothing down because he could not write something that would be worthy of the morning. He slept in slices, dreams staggered with wakefulness. At 4 a.m., he fed Mason in the pale wash of the kitchen light and said the sentence again under his breath. At 5, he ironed a wrinkle that did not exist. At 6, he stood in the doorway of the study and watched Izzy sleep with her hand open on the pillow like a person unafraid of what it might hold. Morning arrived in its polite shoes. Carmen brewed coffee and then made tea because the day needed both. Izzy dressed with solemn joy and let Carmen fuss with a hair ribbon and then took it out because it felt like a decision she wanted to own. The babies went into their car seats with the equanimity of travelers who have accepted airports as part of life. Leon put on the soft shirt and the suit that fit like someone had guessed who he was becoming and stitched fabric around the guess. They left the house in a procession that felt, for a breath, like a parade, minus the noise, plus the purpose. The city blinked at them, then went back to pretending it didn't care. In the car, Izzy watched the window for omens and decided a small bird landing on a traffic light counted. Leon drove like a man carrying a bowl of water to a table across a crowded room. At the courthouse steps, Marcia stood with a folder and eyes that told the truth. You have done the work. You still have to do more. Miriam arrived with a slim brief and a pen that had watched 1,000 hearings tilt and still believed in the possibility of tilt toward sense. They entered the building where ceilings judge and floors echo, where benches insist you sit up straight, where a flag behind the bench requires you to look at cloth while remembering it is a symbol and not an authority. Judge Patricia Restrepo took her seat with the economy of movement of someone who has long ago decided not to waste any. She wore seriousness like a sweater. She glanced at the docket, at the faces, at the babies, at the girl in blue with hands folded and the man beside her wearing a soft shirt as if someone had told him softness counts. She tapped her pen against the wood once, a metronome to bring the room into time. Call the case, she said, and the clerk's voice made the names official. Air turned into record. Leon felt Izzy's knee touch his calf under the table. Not a plea, not a panic, just the confirmation that proximity is a fact you can inventory. He placed his palm flat against the table and let it be a promise she could see. The babies breathed. Carmen prayed. Marcia watched everyone like a medic. Miriam straightened a page that did not need straightening and smiled at the judge as if she had introduced her to good news on a bad day before. Questions would come. Answers would need to be as precise as diapers. Stories would not be proof, but would be necessary scaffolding. The morning held stillness like a piece of glass. Then the first question rose, and the day began its arithmetic. The courtroom did not waste time pretending it was about anything other than order. Questions fell like stones into still water. Miriam rose, measured, allowed Leon to speak in sentences that were neither decoration nor apology. The state's attorney asked about deception at the hospital. Leon answered with the words rehearsed until they sounded not rehearsed at all. He admitted the lie. He explained the urgency. He rested the case not on rhetoric, but on breath counted and fever feared. The judge nodded once without signaling verdict. Izzy was called, a child at a desk too tall for her knees. She sat straight, voice quiet enough that the clerk leaned forward. She spoke of promises, of hands and voices, of brothers who did not yet know the word brother, but knew her heartbeat when they lay against it. She did not cry. She did not embellish. She spoke like someone reading the rules of a game she had invented and dared the room to call it childish. The judge did not dare. Marcia's report landed like a scaffold, each factor wrong. Cribs, kitchen, school, the divestitures, the calendar on the fridge. She noted safety, affection, adaptation. She noted sacrifices measurable in contracts and immeasurable in nights awake. She noted the word Papa recorded in her file not as evidence, but as weather. The state's attorney gestured at wealth, at optics, at precedent. Miriam countered with presence, with permanence, with the improbability of a 7-year-old thriving in chaos only to unravel in security. The baby slept through part of it, a mercy, then cried, a proof. Leon rose, gathered one without hesitation, murmured without performance, soothed with the instinct of repetition. The judge washed his hands, her pen still. When the questioning closed, silence took its turn. The judge leaned back, eyes hooded in the way of people who listened to voices not in the room. She spoke at last, not to Leon, not to Izzy, but to the record. The law asks me to consider best interest. Interest is a word accountants like. Best is a word poets like. Somewhere between them is the space children live. I find that space here. Her ruling took 3 paragraphs and no theatrics. Permanent custody to Leon Moore. Siblings to remain together. Oversight scheduled, but not suspicion. She tapped her pen once, final, and closed the file. The gavel did not fall because it was not needed. The case ended with a sigh rather than a bang. Izzy turned her head, met Leon's eyes, and let her shoulders drop an inch. That was the verdict she had been waiting for. Carmen wept without shame. Miriam wrote something in the margin of her notes that looked suspiciously like gratitude. Marcia allowed herself the luxury of smiling at a child, not just a file. The courthouse steps felt different going down than up. On the way in, they had been stone that tested your shoes. On the way out, they were a ramp into air. Cameras waited, sniffing for drama. Miriam formed a shield with her brief. Carmen pressed close. Leon lifted one baby higher, as if their smallness were an answer bigger than microphones. No comments, Miriam said with lawyerly finality. But Izzy, who was 7 and had not yet been trained in public relations, whispered to Sam on her hip, "We won." And a reporter close enough to hear decided to keep it as a secret rather than a headline. The car ride home was subdued, not because joy was absent, but because relief had its own weight. Izzy pressed her forehead to the window and traced the blur of buildings. Leon drove with one hand steady on the wheel and the other stretched behind to touch a car seat strap, as if confirming gravity. Carmen hummed to him no one else knew. The babies slept, unconcerned that their names had been written into law. At the house, the calendar received a new note in bold ink. "We stay." Izzy wrote it with determination, pressing hard enough to leave grooves in the page. She decorated the words with stars, which she claimed were not decoration but witnesses. Leon left it there without comment, because some proclamations are better in a child's hand than in a judge's mouth. The neighborhood responded like a family you didn't know you had. Louisa arrived with soup and a story about how saints celebrate quietly. The librarian slipped Izzy a new map book with a wink. The man on the stoop who had blessed them weeks ago raised his cup of coffee in salute. Even the teenager in the hoodie muttered, "Cool," which was the highest honor available in his dialect. Leon returned calls he had ignored. He told investors the project would proceed slower, that profit would come later, that dignity had a cost he was now willing to pay. Some withdrew, some doubled down. He accepted both without flinch. He had learned that wealth measured without affection is a desert map with no rivers marked. That night, they ate arroz con pollo again, not because it was symbolic, but because Carmen believed food heals repetition. Izzy asked for seconds. Leon poured himself water with both hands steady. The babies cooed as if rehearsing laughter. No one mentioned the court. No one needed to. The house was loud enough with forks and breathing. When Izzy went to bed, she asked for a story. Leon, caught without a book in hand, improvised. He told her about a builder who thought he knew how to make towers, but discovered towers do not keep you warm. He told her about a girl who carried 3 stars in her arms until she found a place to put them in the sky. He did not say their names. He didn't need to. She smiled, drifted, and, just before sleep, murmured, "The house is warm now." He agreed with a nod she did not see. The weeks after the ruling unfolded not with fireworks, but with chores. Permanence looked like laundry folded without the fear of inspection. It looked like school drop-offs where teachers no longer glanced at forms twice. It looked like the luxury of boredom, a gift Izzy had never owned until now. Leon restructured his empire in silence. 2 companies sold, 1 merged, 1 given to Raphael to steer with full authority. He kept the project in Medellin but altered its bones. More housing, less spectacle, more parks, fewer lobbies that looked like banks. The press called it a pivot. He called it a correction. He attended fewer meetings, read more feeding logs. He discovered that profit reports looked different when you read them with a baby asleep on your chest. Izzy grew, not taller in the way you measure against a doorframe, though that too, but outward, into space she now trusted would hold her. She joined Valentina in after-school games, came home with scraped knees and stories about multiplication. She began to ask questions less about survival, where will we sleep, and more about wonder, why do birds never get lost? Leon did not always have answers. He learned that not answering was sometimes better than pretending to. The babies became a chorus. Mason practiced crawling with the seriousness of an apprentice. Noah babbled syllables like beads on a string. Sam discovered clapping and applauded everything. Bottles filled, socks matched, even sneezes. Their room filled with second-hand toys that Carmen disinfected with reverence, with mobiles that Leon assembled like contracts, with laughter that required no receipts. One evening, Marcia visited, no folder in hand. She sat at the kitchen table, accepted tea, and said, "I came not as oversight, but as neighbor." She looked at Izzy coloring, at Leon wiping a mouth, at Carmen scolding the rice for sticking. You did not win today, she corrected gently. You simply began the part where no one is watching and it still matters. Leon nodded, understanding that vigilance without audience is the definition of real. At night, when the city lights blinked like a tired constellation, Leon stood on the balcony and let the quiet write him a new fortune. He had once believed success was having everything you wanted. Now he understood happiness was wanting everything you had. The distinction was simple, dangerous, and final. He whispered the words aloud, not as mantra, not as press release, but as proof. I choose this. Inside, Izzy turned in sleep, her hand curled near the rabbit, her face soft with dreams that no longer needed armor. The babies breathed in their cribs like small metronomes. Carmen closed a window with the tenderness of someone sealing a prayer. The house, once only walls and glass, exhaled as if alive. And Leon Moore, builder of towers, heir of contracts, woke to the truth that he was father not by blood nor by law alone, but by choice repeated, daily, nightly, forever. The first ordinary Monday after the extraordinary decision arrived without trumpets, which is how ordinary wins. The house woke in shifts, lights sliding down the hallway like a polite guest. Carmen's kettle clicked, Izzy's alarm chirped, a baby sighed, the refrigerator hummed as if proud of its calendar. Leon lifted Sam from sleep and felt the delicious weight that says a child trusts the world enough to hand you all of himself. Breakfast became a choreography that needed no audience. Carmen cracked eggs and told a story about her grandmother's hens. Izzy buttered toast with a precision that would have made an engineer nod. Leon cut fruit into moons because circles felt right. Mason banged a spoon against his tray like a drummer announcing that rhythm had arrived. Noah discovered the joke of banana, which is that it refuses to be dignified, and laughed so hard he hiccuped himself into quiet. Sam watched it all, storing it like savings. On the way to school, Izzy stared out the window and narrated the city like a book she had read before. That corner sells arepas at night. That man naps at noon on the same bench and no one bothers him. That tree drops purple flowers after rain and they stick to the sidewalk like stamps. She asked for music and then changed her mind and asked for silence because sometimes silence lets the heart sing. At the curb, the teacher waved with the authority of someone who has learned children are braver when hellos are simple. Izzy slipped from the car and turned back once, not out of doubt but out of habit, and Leon lifted 2 fingers in a promise the size of a gesture. He drove to the site, where cranes stood like patient animals and men in hard hats stamped their feet against morning cool. The new plan lived in his bag, edges softened by rereading. Councilwoman Duarte met him with a nod that admitted relief costs nothing. He unfurled the drawings. More trees, deeper setbacks, benches that faced one another instead of the street, a daycare footprint stitched into the ground floor and labeled, not with a donor's name, but with a word that was both introduction and vow, Casa Caroline. Duarte traced the letters with one finger, not touching, as if names can smudge. She was the mother? She asked. Yes, Leon said. And the rule. Rules written by the dead tend to hold. She murmured, not unkindly. She folded the plan and tucked it under her arm like a letter. You will be yelled at. By the men who count only one kind of number. By the women who count another. But the yelling will be shorter than the usefulness. He walked the block with the site foreman and said sentences he had never said on dirt before. Wait before you move that family. The mother nurses at 2. Put them in the building across the park first so the oldest can keep her classroom. Pay the first month's utilities yourselves. The foreman, practical to the bone, scratched his helmet and said, It is more complicated this way. Leon answered, yes, and found the word did not taste like failure. At home, the babies conspired to nap at the same time, an alignment mathematicians would admire. Carmen used the miracle to teach Leon the cumbia of housework. Fold, tuck, lift, hum. She told him about her first apartment in this city, thin walls, thicker hope, a radio that played boleros until the neighbor complained, and then louder after. When my son came, she said, smoothing a tiny shirt flat, I learned that love is a sink you never finish emptying. You think you have drained it, and then someone hands you another dish. She smiled at the laundry basket. It is a joy to run out of towels because it means the water found skin. The afternoon brought small errands that did not feel small because they were needed by someone who could not yet ask. Pharmacy for saline, market for pears, hardware store for outlet covers because safety prefers redundancy. Leon took Sam in a sling that made strangers grin. A man at the counter who had once negotiated brutally over steel rebar threw in 2 night lights and said only, "For the monsters." Leon nodded gravely. Night lights and truth both scare monsters. Izzy returned from school opinionated about clouds. "They are not cotton," she announced, dropping her backpack like a flag. "They are water waiting." She presented a spelling test with a star and a word misspelled so elegantly it should have counted twice. She had drawn a small map on the back, the route from her classroom to the library, and labeled it "My head when it's quiet." Leon taped it beside the calendar because some maps lead you home even when they are not geographically ambitious. After homework, they walked to the park. A boy with a soccer ball invited Izzy with a chin tilt. She ran like the version of herself the city had not seen for months. Leon pushed the stroller in figure eights and considered how circles are never wasted motion when the company is good. Carmen pointed out a woman from 3 houses down who had lost her husband and never lost her capacity to laugh. They waved. The woman waved back with a slice of cake and a napkin, the neighborhood's legal tender. At dusk, Leon grilled corn and Carmen scolded him for burning what is meant to be sweet. They ate on the back steps because chairs felt unnecessary. Izzy told a joke that would not survive translation into adulthood and repeated it when the baby smiled. Sure, she had invented comedy. The first star arrived with a punctuality that made her nod. She whispered something to it, and then, because she was learning that whispers do not grant wishes so much as confirm them, whispered again for herself. The bedtime ritual expanded until it had its own gravity. Baths, pajamas, bottles, 3 kisses on 3 foreheads, nightlight clicked, door left ajar the width of comfort. In the study, Izzy opened the folded paper from her pocket, the one she had carried since winter, and smoothed it with her palm. The creases were tired. The letters, Caroline's hand, were certain. "Promise me, you keep them together. Promise me you will be together, no matter what." She read it once, then twice, then came to the doorway of Leon's office and stood the way a person stands when they do not want to disturb an idea and also want the idea to notice them. He looked up. She lifted the paper without speech. He did not reach out. He waited until she crossed the room and placed it on his desk, as if setting a ship back into water. He read. He read again. He folded it along the old creases and then along new ones he would memorize. He did not say "I promise" because a promise that big is not improved by echo. He only nodded and slid the paper into a drawer, knowing a drawer is not a vault and not pretending. "We will keep it," he said. "All of it." Izzy exhaled. It sounded like a house settling. "Okay," she said, and went to brush her teeth with the ferocity of someone who has decided mint is the taste of victory. In the dark, when sleep came late because joy keeps returning to touch the doorknob, Leon lay awake and counted breaths for old time's sake and new pleasure's sake. The city outside rehearsed tomorrow. Inside, names learned their routines. Father, daughter, son, 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 Carmen, home. And the routines learned their names back. On Saturday, Izzy asked a question she had been saving in the pocket where courage sits. "Can we visit the building?" she said at breakfast, voice low. "The one that was our roof?" Carmen glanced at Leon, a small passport of approval passing between adults. Leon put his coffee down, the cup ringing a soft note against the table. "Yes," he said. "We'll go together." They packed nothing dramatic. A bottle of water, a cloth in case the dust remembered their lungs, the folded jacket that had held 3 babies the way an ark holds animals by pairs and miracles by handfuls. Izzy carried the jacket herself, not as burden but as ceremony. The babies stayed home with Carmen, who declared herself queen of naps, and closed the curtains an inch more than usual. The walk to Calle 44 traced an old fear through a new day. Izzy kept pace with Leon's steps, no need now to become smaller to avoid being seen. The building rose as before, ribs of rebar, spine of concrete, graffiti vines bolder in the sun. The caution tape flapped its tired warnings. A notice from the city was posted with the sort of official font that cannot be argued with by anything but other fonts. Demolition scheduled. Resettlement underway. A new plan pinched beneath the words like a hope tacked to bureaucracy. They stood at the threshold, that nowhere between in and out. Leon asked, "Do you want to go up?" Izzy nodded, then shook her head, then nodded again because choice vibrates. "We'll go to the second floor," he said, choosing moderation as safety. They climbed the stairs that complained out of habit. Sun slid through holes and made patterns on the concrete that could have been maps of imagined countries. In the corner of the room that had been her world, the imprint of the jacket remained in dust like a fossil. She spread the leather on the floor gently. The smell rose, Sun warmed, Rain remembered. She knelt, ran a finger along a seam she had fixed with fishing line one late afternoon when needles were expensive. Leon crouched beside her without speaking. He could feel the building's memory pressing against his skin, the way spaces keep the shapes of past occupants like dents in a pillow. A scuff sounded behind them. The boy with the cigarette, older by months and hunger, hovered in the doorway. He had grown into his shoulders, but not into his certainty. He eyed the jacket, the girl, the man. "You again," he said, to the room more than to them. "Hi," Izzy answered, as if greeting a neighbor and not a ghost. He looked at Leon's shoes, at his watch, at his hands, gathered data like street mathematicians do. "You took them," he said, chin at the jacket. Accusation flaring and then dimming under curiosity. "We took care of them," Leon said. "We are taking care of them." The boy's mouth twisted around the tense of verbs. He shoved his hands into his pockets and leaned against a pillar with a practiced slouch that failed to hide attention. "They say they will knock this down," he said, flicking his chin at the beams. "They will," Leon said. "Carefully. You will build something with windows that blink," the boy announced, disdain wrapping the words in familiar protection. "Yes," Leon said, "and gardens that do not look like decoration. And a place for children to be noisy without the police being called. And a daycare so mothers can choose a job or a nap." The boy snorted a sound that might have been a laugh in a different climate. He scuffed the floor until dust rose and sparkled in the light. "Do you need hands?" he asked, too casual to be accidental. Leon measured the span of the question and found it precisely the width of an outstretched life. "We need hands," he said. "Paid ones. Training comes with the pay." "Name?" The boy hesitated as if names can be stolen. "Hyro," he said at last, and rolled the R with a pride that resisted ownership. "Hyro," Leon repeated. "I'm Leon. This is Izzy." He did not offer a hand, because a hand extended at the wrong time is a bridge into a river. "Come Monday. The site office. Someone will give you a hard hat that does not fit in a job that will not be glamorous. You will like one before the other." Hyro shifted, calculations in his eyes that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with dignity. "Okay," he said. "If you're lying, I will take a hammer to your fancy windows." "Good," Leon said. "You'll know where to find me." Hyro left as silently as he'd arrived, his shadow slipping down the stairs before his shoe sounds did. Izzy touched the jacket again, then folded it carefully. "Can we take a piece?" she asked. Leon nodded. He produced a pocket knife and cut along a seam that had lost its humility years ago. He handed her a rectangle of leather the size of a book. She pressed it to her chest. "We will make a pillow," she decided. "A small one, for the babies to kick when they practice." They descended. On the street, the city went on with the audacity of the living. Leon bought 2 guanabanas from a vendor who insisted on adding a lime because sour reminds sweet to mean it. They walked home slower than they had come, not because the jacket was heavy, but because closure is. At the corner, a siren wailed and Izzy stiffened. Leon saw the movement ripple through her, the old script asking to be read again. He knelt, took her hand, and nodded at the ambulance as it streaked past. "I hear it too," he said. She loosened. "They are going to help," she whispered, a sentence that had taken months to learn. Back home, Carmen accepted the piece of leather as if an altar had asked for it. She set it on the counter and measured with her eyes, already mentally cutting, already inventing a pattern. "We will back it with cloth from the first blanket I bought for my son," she said. "That way promises are sewn on both sides." She glanced at Leon, and he felt the peculiar luck of being included in other people's traditions. That evening, Sam's training in defiance of gravity advanced one scoot forward. He reached, toppled, coughed, a tiny hiccup turning sideways. The invisible line between breath and not breath appeared the way it sometimes does, red and thin. Izzy moved before anyone else did, rolled him to the side the way the pediatrician had shown, rubbed in circles between shoulder blades exactly where she always said, "Here." The cough loosened, the breath returned, small and ragged, and then normal again. Leon did not panic. He watched her small hands move and felt pride arrive not as a shout, but as a tide. "Good," he said when the moment passed. "Good eyes." Izzy shrugged, the way people shrug when the act that saved the day feels like a habit, not a heroism. "Babies forget how to breathe," she said. "You just remind them." She looked up, and he knew she understood the metaphor without needing the word. Before bed, they sat on the floor and stitched the leather pillow by hand. Carmen threaded the needle, Leon tied knots that would survive kicks. Izzy guided the seam with a tongue-out concentration that banishes the rest of the world. When they were done, the pillow looked like something fashioned from a story. They placed it between the cribs like a small brown island. Mason tapped it with his foot in his sleep, as if greeting an old roof. The night made itself comfortable. Izzy fell asleep with dust still on her knees and a clean feeling in her chest. Leon stood at the window and looked toward the building, which in the dark was only a shape against smaller shapes. He imagined it gone, then imagined what would stand there, and knew the second image felt like repair. He whispered thank you into the glass, to the structure that had been harder and kinder than it needed to be, to the jacket that had carried 4 people like a boat, to the boy who had become Hiro when offered Monday. When morning arrived, the first thing Sam kicked was the new pillow, and the house applauded with 3 laughs and 1 happy sigh. They opened Casa Caroline on a cloudy Wednesday, as if daring the sky to contradict the mood. No ribbon cutting with golden scissors, no stage built for speeches that melt. Leon wanted the day to feel like a key turning in a regular lock. The daycare sat at the corner of the new development, glass low enough for children to look out, but high enough for them to be left in peace. A garden tucked behind a wall of bougainvillea, so fuchsia it almost sang. The sign had been hand-painted by a woman who took her time with letters and chose a deep blue that matched the day before it made it better. Neighbors came in 1s and 3s, tugging toddlers, adjusting hats, skepticism folded into pockets with receipts. Councilwoman Duarte walked through the door like someone inspecting a roof during a storm, half expecting to get wet. Marcia stood by the cubbies and smiled at the height of the hooks. Carmen arrived with a tray of pan de yuca so hot she warned souls as well as tongues. Hiro showed up late, shirt clean in a way that announced effort, and took his place near the play structure to tighten bolts that did not need tightening, because sometimes men fix what is already secure to assure themselves it is. Izzy pushed the stroller brigade like a conductor, introducing the room to its purpose. "This corner is for crying," she informed a small boy earnestly. "It has a chair that is soft. You can cry as long as you need, and no one will say stop unless you want them to. This table is for drawing maps. There is a basket of circles here because circles are better than squares when you want to make suns. The bathroom has a step so you can reach the water without feeling small." The boy nodded as if she had read him a treaty. Leon gave a short welcome because long welcomes are rude to children. "This is a place where babies will make noise and it will be considered good," he said. "Where mothers and fathers and grandparents will take a breath and use it to be who they are besides keepers of tiny hearts. Where people will be paid for cleaning, cooking, teaching, not as charity, but as work." He paused, looked at Izzy, and added, "Where promises made in rooms no one saw will be kept in a room everyone can." He did not expect applause and did not get it. He got something better, the soft rise of conversation as people invented how to belong here. A woman asking where to leave the extra diapers because she had bought too many, a teenager asking if he could read to the babies on Saturdays, an old man settling into a chair near the window, as if claiming the job of guard without invitation. Duarte touched the sign lightly with 2 fingers, and then her heart, a secular blessing. Marcia approached Leon with a look that held both auditor and aunt. "You know," she said, "if you continue like this, you will ruin your reputation." "Which one?" he asked, relieved to find humor where fatigue had been living. "The one that says men like you build only for other men like you." She glanced at the room full of other kinds of people. "You are building to be argued with. Keep choosing that." Izzy tugged Leon's sleeve. "There is a speech," she said, eyes bright with the adrenaline of being 7 and having been asked to speak out loud. "But it is not a speech. It is a reading. From a paper." She pulled the folded note, Caroline's, from her pocket and held it up. "Can I?" Leon's throat did the tightening thing it had learned to allow rather than resist. Yes, he said, the word a chair she could stand on. She climbed a small step stool that had been placed near the cubbies on the advice of generations of teachers everywhere and opened the paper with care. The room softened around her, the way rooms do when they realize the most important person in them is the smallest. She read the sentence as if it had been written for this day, which perhaps it had. Promise me, you keep them together. Promise me you will be together, no matter what. She folded the paper again and looked up. We will, she said. We are. No one clapped. A few did. Most just breathed in and out and felt the air change shape. Carmen crossed herself and then wiped at eyes that insisted on participating. Jairo stared hard at the floor because staring at feelings is culturally discouraged and therefore the temptation is large. After the not speech, Casa Caroline behaved like itself. No further need for ceremony. Babies were changed. Bottles warmed. A toddler lay down on the circle rug and announced he was the sun and required planets. Laughter found corners to sit in. The city outside continued its arithmetic of buses and bargains. Inside, someone wrote a name in careful block letters on a cubby label and put a tiny jacket inside it like an anchor. Leon wandered the perimeter not as an owner, but as a man counting blessings to ensure none had been misplaced. He found a scuff on the wall at knee height and smiled because scuffs are proof of use. He found a rubber band on the floor and pocketed it because he had learned that tiny things can become snakes if left unattended. He found himself at the garden wall where bougainvillea threatened to overwhelm everything with its insistence on color. He did not ask the gardener to trim it. He did not mind feeling outmatched by joy. That afternoon, the babies slept so hard the house seemed to lean toward them. Izzy sat with a book open but her eyes half closed, because contentment can be tiring. Leon cleaned counters, a ritual that had become meditation. The phone chirped. An email from Raphael with a photo of the new sign at the site. Community board, Thursdays at 6. Voices welcome. Leon wrote back a single word. Good. Evening brought rain, gentle, as if rehearsing for bigger weather. The water drummed the roof and made every room cozy. Izzy asked, at bedtime, whether promises ever get lighter. Leon considered. They get better at writing, he said. If you feed them and let them sleep and tell them the truth. And if you forget, she asked, then someone you love will remind you. He tapped the drawer where the paper slept, folded and folded again. We keep artifacts in case memory wants help. She lay back, the rabbit against her chest, and closed her eyes with the authority of someone who has decided to sleep. In the nursery, the leather pillow accepted small kicks, as if translating energy into security. Carmen, passing by with a laundry basket balanced on a hip in a posture that could be painted and titled Triumph, paused to kiss 3 foreheads and 1 doorframe. Buenas noches, she told the wood, because houses listen. Later, alone on the balcony, Leon watched the city blur in the rain. Towers softened. Traffic became a river instead of an argument. Somewhere a siren rose and fell, and he did not flinch. He simply counted until the sound became distance. He thought of numbers, profits, timelines, square meters, and of the arithmetic that had replaced them. Feedings, naps, laughs, the sum of hands during bath time, the complex equation of patience multiplied by love divided by fear. He whispered the line he had found and made his. Success is having everything you want. Happiness is wanting everything you have. He had written it once in a notebook, then crossed it out because living it felt more correct than stating it. Tonight he allowed himself the indulgence of speaking it to the rain, not as a thesis, but as gratitude. Behind him, a small cry rose, not urgent, just a query, and he turned, already answering, already a person who knows the way by heart.